Hello, everyone. I'm joined today with Hannah Zamora, a YouTuber, streamer, and critic of the GamerGate movement. How are you doing today, Hannah?
I'm doing very well. Thank you.
You're the first anti-GamerGate person or GamerGate critic that I've interviewed for this project so far over voice. I have done two other interviews over text, and I've got a couple more coming up over voice. So I do appreciate you doing this.
Yeah, I'll do my best to try to, have this side of the conversation represented.
Oh, I do appreciate that. Do you want to tell me about your GamerGate experience?
Um, well, I sort of, at the time it all unfolded, I was sort of there, just observing it in real time, um, as well as sort of the evolution of the sort of social zeitgeist that produced it in sort of the years leading up to it. In those years leading up to it, I occasionally published YouTube videos in opposition to the sort of reactionary, sort of anti-progressive, anti-SJW sort of movement that GG was sort of a part of. That sort of was the sort of wave of reactionary sentiment that sort of continued into Gamergate itself. Um, I did some debates over the years with you, and that's sort of most of my involvement. Mm,
All right. So you viewed GamerGate as being a reactionary sentiment?
yeah, it was basically this popular reactionary backlash to sort of progressive values um, when sort of intersecting the social spaces in and around video games in this industry. Um, that is sort of how I observed it, yes.
What would you consider to be progressive values in gaming?
I guess everything that um, people in Gamergate found themselves concerned with in and around social justice warriors and stretching all the way into sort of like, how should I say, like gender relation anxieties, that people have a lot of people sort of have difficulties like navigating those issues, women being successful in certain spaces. People will react and be like, oh, it's just because like they have big titties or whatever. And get sort of frustrated and vindictive over things like that, which all did sort of play a part. Um, so yeah.
And when you say reactionary, what do you mean?
um, it takes some abstraction to see when sort of progressive changes happens in a social space that may not benefit one's individual self and find that to be acceptable. So other people getting rights while you don't, or maybe you have to make some space for them, whether or not it's fair, it is undoubtedly not immediately beneficial to oneself. And so people react and have a backlash and want it to not happen because they sort of want to preserve what already exists because they're comfortable with that. And that's just sort of a broad cultural human thing that happens, and you can see it all over the place, really. But that's sort of what happened in the gaming sphere in 2014, I guess.
And when you say make a space for them, you mean like that women or some women felt excluded from video games because there was a perception, uh, right or wrong, a perception that this was a more male-dominated hobby, right?
Yeah, I mean, that definitely happened, and then it was sort of reinforced by definitely notable like behavior by people online. I don't think it can't be denied that sometimes women would get harassed for being women, like in voice chats and games and certain streamers and this and that. And there was sort of a kind of just weird behavior. I mean, lots of how should I say? Lots of gamers are, young men who are learning how to exist in a social environment. Everyone's like a person in progress. Everyone's trying to learn how to exist as a human being. And since most gamers are young guys, like you are still at the beginning of really learning how to do that. So there was a lot of should I say, uh, not super well developed behavior, a lot of clumsy dealing with one's emotions with other people you might feel some sexual resentment towards.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there is a problem with women receiving like harassment and stuff during online games, especially. It's a noticeable, or at least it was a noticeable phenomenon. I don't know if it's gotten better or not, but it was definitely a noticeable phenomenon growing up. Um,
Yeah, I
anytime
get
you
the
hear
sense
a
of it being better now for sure, but
yeah.
mm,
And so I mean, I definitely see that that's a problem. I don't. I think that's something we can like try to solve and address as a society. I don't view GamerGate as like being in opposition to that though.
I guess it depends what part of GamerGate we want to talk about.
Well, do you think that there were parts of GamerGate that were openly misogynistic?
um, I think definitely at the beginning, which so happens to be my primary focus of what Gamergate was and my judgment of Gamergate in the end. Because there's a lot of stuff that happened over the years and it kind of becomes a bit of a mess, muddled mess of this and that happening. But a lot of my criticisms really have to do with the initial sort of genesis of the movement. You know, Zoe Quinn, Nathan Grayson, Burgers and Fries, Gamers Are Dead, and like so the initial couple weeks after that. And honestly, after those couple of weeks, I sort of care less, mostly because a lot of it was not um, really made up for. So definitely during that period of time, I think there was a lot of misogyny being thrown around. Mm.
I do believe that I quoted you in my first book where you outlined your view that I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but it was that even if Gamergate essentially did a lot of like good stuff or they weren't misogynistic later on, you think that the fact that this spawned from this drama involving a game developer, a games journalist having sex, and some people saying some sexist stuff on IRC chat rooms, that this overshadows whatever good could possibly come from the movement, even if it went on for years.
Yeah, one thing I sort of liken it to as a fairly close comparison, I feel, is something I was personally involved in, and I was similarly involved in the action, like on the ground. I was out there doing stuff with was back in the day Project Chronology, which was sort of anonymous as sort of scuffle with the Church of Scientology. If you recall, like it also started off fairly wet and wild. You know, if I recall correctly, it was this thing to do with Scientology, like wanting to censor something on YouTube, and Chan culture sort of rallied around sort of opposing them and made like all these cringy videos and for the most part did very non personalized harassment of the Church of Scientology, like DDoSing their website and like doing certain things like that. Um, but what happens shortly thereafter is that there's this one person, Mark Bunker, and this other woman, Tori Magoo. They posted these videos that sort of tried to speak to Anonymous and say like, hey, understand you don't like Scientology. We've been protesting against Scientology for like years and years and years, and like it would be super cool if y'all sort of protested with us and maybe don't just like do weird internet shenanigans. And I, although I do feel like it's at a bit of a different level because what Chronology was before it changed wasn't as bad because it was never sort of personal. It was never like this individual harassment that's like really hard to justify. And also because Scientology is indeed bad, so like opposition to it is good. You know, the behavior anonymous changed. They dropped this sort of broad online decentralized anonymous protest movement and they went to in person per city sort of organized. There were leaders, there was structure, there was sort of anonymous cells in each city, and there was um, what's what I'm looking for, when there's someone who can answer it for issues. but if they rise. But yeah, there's this change sort of like to actual in-person protest. Um, I feel did vindicate what happened before and did successfully sort of change it into something legitimate. Um, there was much more. Mm, I guess I don't need to say the same thing over and over. It was more legitimate, and I think that that transformation was sufficient in sort of overcoming what was done before, such that it can overtake it. I do not feel that GamerGate did anything similarly. There was just sort of a whole bunch of shit that went down, and then there was this sort of veneer of legitimate criticism that was sort of introduced, that at the time was sort of mocked by its people who didn't buy it, calling it ethics in games journalism. That was the meme at the time. Um, and there was sort of this confoundment by Gamergate people that they weren't being taken seriously, even though never really like made up for what happened before, and then just presented a few not illegitimate points, or not things that were not um, illegitimate to discuss, I suppose. Mm.
Hi, I'm Tachyon Blue. Thank you for watching another one of my GamerGate book video segments. Altogether, I've interviewed over 70 people involved with GamerGate, and I'm going to be launching a Kickstarter campaign in the coming weeks. So please, I need your support to help make this project a reality. I'm turning these 70 plus interviews into a multi-volume series of books, the first volume of which is already completed. And so I'd like you to please stay tuned for more information about the Kickstarter. And if you haven't already, please like, subscribe, and comment. More updates will be coming in the near future. Thank you, and take care.